Today is March 10th. Interview with Jim Carvin. Okay.
Ready to roll?
Mm-hmm.
I'm Eric Hardy, and this is George Winston III, and we're part of the Dutch Morial Oral History Project for the Midlo Center, International Center for New Orleans Studies. And we're here with Mr. Jim Carvin, who's a political consultant during the 1977 mayoral campaign. And just to get things started, we're curious to know, Mr. Carvin, how did you meet Dutch Morial?
I met him in 1969 when he ran for councilman at large. And that was when Moon Landrieu got elected. And Dutch didn't have any money. And so whatever he did have, I handled. I mean, I did one TV commercial with him. We just didn't have enough money. And that's how we met in that particular campaign.
Well, did he approach you? How was the actual meeting?
Well, I was handling in the first Billy Gust, who was running for mayor. And Gus decided to endorse Morial for council at large. Mm-hmm. And I met him through Gust.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's no problem. So what were your early ideas about his chances?
I thought he had a decent chance if he could get black voters to vote for him. And that sounds strange now. But Ed Renwick did a poll, and we decided to find out how many people really knew Dutch was black. And what we found was that a lot of black people, was not aware that he was black. He'd been prominent in the civil rights movement, but the ordinary guy in the street doesn't know that, or didn't know that at the time. So when Dutch wanted to hire me for the campaign, we had lunch at Antoine's, and his question was, well, how are you going to get me the white vote? And I said, well, Dutch, the problem is, how are we going to get you the black vote? Which totally stunned him. I mean, he said, what do you mean? I said, well, we just polled it. And a lot of black people don't know you're black. And he was shocked. I mean, And so we discussed that. So the first strategy was also to change the colors. He was using a blue and orange, which was horrible. And I said, who did that for you? He said, I did. I said, it looks like it. And because Dutch was the kind of guy who, tell you very fast, had been an editor of the paper, and he'd done this, and he'd done that, he did. And he was not a graphic designer. So we changed the colors to 3 shades of blue. And that's how we got started with, what we were going to do. The main problem was where we were going to get the money. Because in that race, you had DeRosa, Kiefer, Toni Morrison were the major candidates for mayor. And Dutch was in it, but a lot of people didn't give Dutch much chance. because you didn't have a black majority at that point. I think it was only about 55-45, about 55 being white. And the assumption that was made was that Tony Morrison, because of his father, Nat Kiefer, because of his support in the Ninth Ward, that they would get black votes, and the Dutch wouldn't get anything.
Now, if you can step back for 1 minute, what was the nature of what you were doing, like as a political or a campaign consultant? Could you explain your responsibilities going into the campaign?
Well, my responsibilities generally, and it's the same thing applied with Dutch, was, oh, you've got a phone call, was to advise him on how to put a campaign together, and how we would project him as a candidate, and what we needed to do in the way of organization and raising money. So these are the things I generally do.
So yeah, you took a.
I functioned very much as a campaign manager, although I never take that title. I just use consultant.
Now you said that the strategies, one was money, one was how to attract black voters. Was there a certain order that you laid things down from top to bottom?
Well, I guess money was the first, because without money you can't do anything. And there was a lot of politics in terms of black organizations who had just come into being. I mean, that Soul and Cool and all these really emerged in the mayoralty election of 4 years before, or rather 8 years before, when Landrieu was elected. That was the real start of organized black groups. So they were in a particularly powerful position when they were endorsing one white candidate over another white candidate. And they made a lot of money doing that. So Dutch kind of threw that off balance because he didn't have a lot of money. And they weren't sure how many votes he would pull.
Just a practical standpoint from the perspective of the black organization
Yeah.
at the time. And did he actually go to them, did you find? Or did he?
Oh yeah, he went to them.
Really? He actually tried to work with them?
Oh, sure.
What were some ways, because I remember reading at some point that he had, rather than him offering money to Soul or Coup or any other Bold, any other organization, that he was saying that they actually should be offering money to him.
Yeah, that sounds like Dutch. Obviously that didn't work.
So was there a way around it? A way that it can be
There was one way around it, is that in the end, Dutch stiffed Coup. I think the price was $10,000. He promised to pay it, but he didn't pay it. He may have paid him after, but he didn't pay him before.
Now, just speaking to Sharon Brolsky, I was asking her once about how she runs a campaign and how things are actually taking place, and money here is a big concern. I understand that oftentimes that a candidate will have stuff, basically run a tab for printing, maybe ads, television commercials, radio ads, anything like that. Basically, they're going to tally up things, and whenever the campaign, when there is a deadline and things have to be paid. Was that the standard? Was that the norm? At the
It
time?
is the norm. You never give a candidate credit.
Really?
Not unless
No.
you don't want to get paid.
Right. It's strictly a cash up front business, which is one of the things that attracted me to it. I mean, I had been in advertising and, you know, banks and insurance and all this kind of stuff, in which you front the money for the commercial advertiser, and they pay you afterwards. But in politics, you get the money up front because the TV stations and the radio stations and the newspaper, everybody wants it up front.
Mm-hmm. Well, you said that's sort of what attracts you to the political game. Now, particularly with Morial, did you have any sort of ideological interest?
Yes, I did, because I'm a liberal, and I was involved in the civil rights things in the 50s and 60s and so forth. So yeah, I was very much in favor of Morial, ideologically.
Where do you think he stood apart from those other, Morris and Kiefer? What essential things about Morial made him stand above?
Well, I think Dutch was smarter than any of them. I think he was better qualified in many ways, and perhaps more honest. So he had a lot of attributes that attracted me to him.
Mm-hmm. And the idea was then to convey those things, those attributes, to the general public.
Right.
And what was, what do you think, did you center on one thing in particular that you felt would garner the attention of the electorate, or?
Frankly, I don't remember. You know, that we had one central theme.
Now, from reading some of his campaign platforms, and George, you may want to help me out on this, it was economics and the fiscal situation within the city was a main priority, and crime was becoming something else. I think Morrison picked up on that at some point. But with his staff, how were ideas developed, and who actually did the research? And could you name some of the people in his staff that you felt were essential to the campaign?
David Marcello, who did the position papers mostly, and was just a general advisor to Dutch and to me. He was critical to the staff situation. The other staff person was Paul Valto, who did everything but sweep up the office. No, I did sweep up the office. His campaign manager was named Bernard. That's the last name. David Bernard, black guy.
Bernard, was it Don? No, it was Don Hubbard.
No, Don Hubbard wasn't in it.
Yeah.
Ask Marcello, he may remember. I don't remember his name. Valto would. And Valto is somebody you definitely should talk to, if you can get a hold of him.
We recently interviewed Russell Henderson.
Yeah.
And he was talking about sort of
Well, Russell could tell you who that was.
his own, Russell's interest in it all, and sort of radicalism from that time.
Well, Russell, I don't know really what Russell did. He was always around the headquarters and tried to handle volunteers. The person we got to handle the volunteers was Mary Ethel Siefkin. Her brother had been a street representative. Mary Ethel was white, and she could tell you a lot about the volunteer organization. I didn't really fool with that very much because we didn't have a lot of volunteers.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, you just mentioned two things actually. Mary Ethel Siefkin being white
Yeah.
and a woman. And Russell had talked about that. And also Morial's secretary, who, after his election, had mentioned the same thing about his approach to sort of including.
Well, when Dutch started out, he was very inclusive. He really believed in integration. And when he became mayor, he tried to put situations together with white and blacks in setting up companies, and he very much had an integrationist approach because he'd come out of the civil rights movement, and that's what it was all about.
Now, did you have to deal with his the issue of his possibly having to resign the judgeship or not being able
Oh,
to
yes.
Can you speak a little about that?
Well, he had gotten a ruling, I think, that allowed him to run without having to resign the judgeship. And it was not much of an issue until the runoff. Then it became a very big issue because DeRosa made it an issue. And so it wasn't until the last few weeks that in the second primary that we made a decision that Dutch would go ahead and resign the judgeship.
So just now continuing for him to actually hold the position throughout the race, was it a tactic in any way?
Was it a what?
Any sort of tactic for him to actually hold?
No, it was economic.
So he didn't take a leave of absence without pay?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. All right. Well, now you mentioned DeRosa and the runoff. Now I understand that Raymond Strother was DeRosa's political consultant.
Right.
So imagine there was a little tactical strategy going on.
Well,
Would you like to comment on that?
I knew Ray from before. When Ray, I had handled Gillis Long for governor in 1963. And a guy who I later partnered with, Gus Weil, handled McKithen. And Strother actually worked for Gus Weil in this campaign. And and when Ray was doing his thesis at LSU, he decided to do it on the '63 gubernatorial campaign. So he came and interviewed me, and he interviewed Gus Weil, and he interviewed the guy who had handled the Republican candidate, and put his thesis together and then sold it for $25 a copy. Which should tell you something about Ray Strother. So I pretty much knew Ray, and I liked Ray, still do. But I also knew some of the other people who were involved in helping DeRosa.
James Carville.
Carvin worked for Gus Weil, and he was somewhere involved in it, but I don't remember, a specific thing.
So, in your mind, as a consultant, and you have Raymond Struther on the other side with DeRosa.
Right.
Now, you're not just playing personalities against one another, but you are helping to direct things. Did you see a sort of, by knowing Raymond Struther and how he worked campaigns, could you see yourself in any way matching him? Or did you just let the personalities flourish? And
No, that's not the way I approach a campaign. I advise a candidate, and I also do it myself, is to approach a campaign like a golf game. You play your own game. You do not worry about what the other guy is doing. Because if you don't do what you're supposed to do, it doesn't make any difference what he does. So you can't wait for the opponent to screw up. You have to do your thing, get it across, get the message across, project the candidate without worrying about what the other guy's going to do. That doesn't mean you don't pay attention to what they're doing. But more time is wasted in political campaigns talking about what the opposition is doing, or might do, or could do. And it's all a waste of time. Because if you don't do what you're supposed to do, whatever they do doesn't really matter.
Well, that I guess leads me to one last question before I pass over to George. Ray Struther in his book, Fallen Up, mentioned Walter Isaacson as being the reporter who broke the story of Joe DeRosa making ill-advised comments about the Morial campaign, something to the effect of the surge in black voters and saying Jigaboo's coming out from the woodworks. And you mentioned that there's an interesting story between...
Well, the story that I'd mentioned to you before we started this was Walter was the City Hall reporter for the State's Item. And Walter knew that we did a poll. This is coming close to the end of the first primary. So he came over here, we sat down, and I made a decision to show Walter the poll, which showed that Dutch was either leading or very close to leading, which was not the general perception. And I did that deliberately because I wanted Walter to print it. So Walter predicted that Dutch Morial would make the runoff. Of course he did. Then in the runoff, Walter came around to ask me about a poll. And I said, no, I'm not going to give it to you. And he was totally shocked. I mean, well, you gave me the last one, why don't you give me this one? I said, well, it doesn't suit my strategy to give you this one. So if you want to find out what I know, the Times-Picayune or the State's Item should take a poll. And I did that because Dutch was leading. And I didn't want him printing that Morial was going to win the election and alarm white voters who would go out in droves to keep a black man from becoming a mayor. So I didn't tell Walter. And Walter guessed wrong. He guessed DeRosa.
Okay. Talked a little bit earlier about the black political organizations that were coming up post-1965 and during the Landry administration. I want to know, when did you make the decision that you would have to circumvent them or to try to go around them in order to win the election?
Well, we didn't try to go around them too much, but we just tried to go over them. In other words, the decision was to make an appeal to black voters, and without turning off white voters. It gets kind of tricky when you do this, but we were able to do that. And we did work with, in the runoff, some black organizations, because my feeling was all along, and I told Dutch, if we get to the runoff, that's critical, because once blacks see that you could be elected, that a black man could really win in New Orleans, they'll come to you in droves. They don't want to throw their vote away on some ideological thing. They want to vote for a winner. And so another part of that, and it doesn't apply to the black organizations, was that another PR guy, Dave Kleck, had handled Toni Morrison. And Morrison finished 4th. And my daughter was a Toni Morrison groupie, okay? In spite of my working for Dutch. And because she knew Toni, and Toni and I had been friends, so she knew the Morrisons and really liked Toni and so forth. And Kleck was, on election night, the first primary, was telling her at the Morrison headquarters how sorry he felt for me because I'd worked so hard for Dutch, and of course Dutch wasn't going to make it. The early returns kind of looked like that. And an interesting story there is that Ed Renwick and I went over to the clerk of court's office to get the returns as they were coming in, because you didn't have the sophisticated system that you have now. And we concluded that we were going to make the runoff. And so we went to see Dutch, who was at the Bienville House Hotel by himself in a room. And he was sitting on the bed, and he was very dejected because he's been listening to the TV, radio, and these early returns were not good for him. And we told him, Dutch, don't worry. We are going to make it. We have gone over the precincts that we've gotten. Everything is shaping up. You will lead the runoff. At that point, he brightened up.
Okay. From a professional standpoint, as a PR guy or PR director, how was it perceived, or how was engaging in such a campaign conceived at the time, from a professional standpoint? Was it like a challenge that you would have accepted, or was it something that was deemed useless? Or
Oh no, I didn't deem it useless.
in your circles, I mean, like as far as advertising professionals would be concerned.
Well, you never go into a campaign knowing you're going to win. Okay. You go in trying to assess all your chances, very much the way a general goes into a battle. He's not sure he's going to win, but if he puts his troops in the right place and his tactics work out for this, he's going to win that battle. And that's how I look at it in terms of a political campaign. Even though it's not your subject, I mean, I handled Ray Nagin for mayor, who was a late entry, nobody gave Ray Nagin a chance to win the election. But I saw that we had an opportunity to win. And the reason I saw that, I looked at a poll that Nagin had taken, I think that Silas Lee may have done. And it showed me that Parsons was very popular as a police chief, but he only had high 20s as a preference for mayor. I looked at that and I said, they like him for police chief, but they don't like him for mayor. Therefore, it's anybody's game. Anybody can win this election, including you, if we do it right. And we did it right. For instance, by starting out the campaign, showing a television commercial of him by Charity Hospital, saying, I was born at Charity Hospital, you know, here, etc. So we were able to give his background. And an awful lot of people identified with him because a lot of people have been born at Charity Hospital. And then we did another commercial where his father had been a janitor at City Hall. And that again, well, this is not just some guy who was born with the silver spoon and that you know, this is a guy who really worked his way up. And so you look for these kind of opportunities. And with Dutch, we had a great story to tell of the way he came up. And people vote for somebody that they can identify with, who they think has their interests at heart. And that applies to any political campaign. And that's what we tried to do with Dutch.
Is there ever any concern that the budget, that there will be a budget problem, that it wouldn't be enough to run an effective campaign? Because you mentioned earlier that, you know.
Well, we always had a budget problem.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a meeting at a hotel where there was a discussion of, you know, where we were going to put our resources. And I decided that what I wanted to do was I needed to get somewhere near 20% of the white vote to win. And that the white vote that would vote for him was prejudice against DeRosa. That he was Italian, which was next to being black, the worst thing you could be, and that uptown New Orleans was right. But the way to get to uptown New Orleans was to do newspaper ads. And so I called David Cleric, who I considered the best print writer that I knew. And he was gone on vacation to Hawaii. And I called him in Hawaii and I said, Dave, you want to come back and work for Dutch? And he said, yeah. I said, well, get back here because I'm planning a newspaper campaign. And also at that meeting, when we discussed the resources, Dutch got me aside and he said, look, we lost the last time because we didn't have enough television. We are going to have television. Now, if you can work it out with the newspaper and budget it, but I want television. I said, oh, I intended to do the television. I don't want to go all in television. I need to get the uptown whites. Because we're going to get the black vote. And I'm sorry I digressed on your question of black organizations.
Okay.
We did work with them. And that's when I first met Bill Jefferson. Because Jefferson had been representing Dutch in this lawsuit involving the Court of Appeal, and I remember meeting at the Royal Orleans for lunch with Don Hubbard and Sherman Copeland and Bill Jefferson, where we discussed their coming on board to support Dutch. which they eventually did, I believe.
I actually think that I understand that Dutch may have stiffed Bill Jefferson on that.
Well, Dutch maintained he didn't. I think the figure was somewhere around $15,000. And the argument really happened after the campaign, when Dutch gave Jefferson some legal patronage. I forget what it was, but it was considerably more than $15,000. But Jefferson was still holding out for the $15,000. I don't remember whatever happened, whether Jefferson got his $15,000 or not.
This is my last question to you. At the time, did it really ring clear to you that you were going to be a part of that history by you being behind this campaign and being a major guy in the campaign? Did it ring clear to you at the time that it was a major part of history that you guys were trying to accomplish?
That it was a major part of history? Mm-hmm. Absolutely not. He wasn't concerned about history. He was concerned about winning the election and being mayor. I mean, he was concerned about history later on, but not at that time. And that time there was only one objective, and that was winning the election, getting him to be mayor.
What message did you need to get out through print ads to the white community, the white uptown community? Did you feel was necessary to accentuate?
Oh, one, we did an ad called Statement of Consciousness or something. I don't remember all the ads, but they were heavily print. I mean, it wasn't just a bunch of pictures of Dutch and vote for Morial from there. It was a series of ads that kind of dealt with his beliefs and who he was and so forth. That we aimed at getting the silk stocking districts, enough of them, to vote for Dutch. We always knew that the majority would not vote for him because he was black. But we were apparently successful. And I think we did get 20% of the vote, white vote.
I wouldn't say that, it seems that Morial wasn't what maybe we've called the quote-unquote race man, that is always, race is a part of every message. Did you think that he transcended race, or
well, he did transcend race. As I told you, Dutch was a believer in integration. And when he became mayor, he wanted to bring the white and black community together to do things. And he was pretty much rejected by the white business community. And at that point, Dutch turned and became a lot more black-oriented than he'd been. Mm-hmm. But it was as a result of the treatment that he had gotten as mayor from the white business community.
Did you stay on board after the campaign?
No, I never do.
Did you come around for the second? Did you?
Oh yeah, sure. I've handled every mayor since Landry.
Really?
Yeah.
How was that issue with Fauché later on?
Well, Fauché was a protege of mine.
Really?
Yeah. I brought Fauché into the Billy Gus campaign, and then later on into Edwin Edwards' thing for governor. And so I knew Fauché very well.
Really? That is actually interesting. I'm trying to think of you mentioned what ways did you actually court the black vote? You said that you needed to first have him identified as black by the black community? Like,
Well,
registration drives,
there was registration drives, but they never really work. What we did was to aim television at the black community, as I said, without turning off the whites. And there was a funny thing about Dutch. He was very personable in a room like this. But you put a camera in front of him and he changed personality. He stiffened up. And this created a problem for me because I'm not getting, I know if I can get the personality across, I'll reach the voter. But the personality he was giving me in front of the camera was not that. That was his television personality. So I decided that the way to do it was to put him in a room, a studio, with an audience of people and let them ask him questions. And we did this for about 3 hours. And then I edited out the question and answer into a whole series of spots. And he was very good because he wasn't talking to the camera, or he didn't think he was talking to the camera. He was talking to you who asked him this question.
I see. Did you see a major difference between how television spots were conducted then as opposed to now?
Not really. I mean, now you've got a lot more technical things that you can do. But the basic approach hasn't changed. I mean, it's still a question of how you project the candidate. And Dutch projected well under the method that I used to get the performance out of him. Because everything is a performance. And for instance, Edwin Edwards had an absolute stopwatch in his head. If you told him he needed 27 seconds, you got 27 seconds. Just absolutely amazing. I've never seen anybody who could do that.
And what were some of Dutch's idiosyncrasies or strengths in terms of that? Something you really could draw on besides?
Well, there was one commercial that stood out. Somebody asked him a question about what he really wanted to be or something. I guess it was implying that he wanted to use mayor to run for something else. And he said, I don't want to be king. I just want to be mayor. And there was this pause, and it was a dramatic, I don't want to be king. I just want to be mayor. And the way he delivered it and so forth was got across.
Are there any last thoughts you have about the period? Anything, one last thing you could think of that you'd like to say for posterity?
Although a lot of things I can say about but you're primarily dealing with the first election, right?
First election and his first administration.
Well, his first administration, he put together a fairly good administration. He had Renard Rochon as his CAO, and Rochon was a smooth political figure. I mean, he wasn't just an accountant; he was a politician, and that was a very good choice. Tony Bumfrey, who handled economic development coming from UNO, and that Tony was very good. Jim Chubbuck was his basically chief of staff. And Chubbuck, I had known back to the Gillis Long days, and then he had moved on with Bennett Johnson to Washington. And right after the election, we were, Dutch and Sybil and I was sitting in his kitchen at home trying to discuss who should be in the administration. I said, well, I just talked to Jim Chubbuck, and I think he would be open to coming back. He's not too happy in Washington. I think he'd be willing to come back if you call him. And Dutch did, and they worked out an agreement, and Chubbuck came back. And Chubbuck was had a very soft style, and knew the state politics, knew city politics, because he had started the Institute of Politics at Loyola. And Harriet Burnett was in charge of scheduling and all kinds of other things, I guess. There was a black guy who he brought in, whose name I don't remember. Ask Mumphrey or Marcella, they probably will remember. But overall, his staff in the first administration was pretty good.
All right, well, we appreciate your time.
Sure. If there's anything more you want at some point, I'll be happy to sit down.
I'd like to look at if you have some of the campaign
Yeah, I have them.
videos or
Right.
any sort of